On today's tutorial, we're going to talk all about the weather and how we can add it to influence the content, but also the style of our website. So what we're trying to do on this website is add our temperature, but also what the weather is in this location right now. So if we're at a different location, we can get a completely different theme. So in today's tutorial, we'll talk about how we can add some JavaScript to get this effect. So let's start with a basic project, something that looks like this. We've got a simple website and we've got this kind of empty area where our weather wants to be. We also have a default theme as well, which has a black background, which we can change a little bit later. But first of all, how do we fill in these details? Well, let's have a look at what we have currently. So in our code, what we have is a simple HTML. We have our usual head and body. We've got a header in here as well. A div with the class of logo, which has our blueprint architects. We've got the location of Brooklyn, which is where we want to be. We've got this div with the class of weather, which currently has these dashes where we want to fill in this info. So the H2, we want to fill in the actual Fahrenheit, and the P tag, we want to fill in the actual weather, so cloudy or overcast. Next, we've got the rest of the content. So we've got a nav and a section in here as well. Style sheet looks fairly simple. So what we have in here is some reset. We have our normal typography. We've got some CSS variables in here for later. So we've got a default background of black. But if we have a clear sky, we might want the background to be blue. If we have overcast weather and clouds, we might want it to be gray. So we're going to tweak how this looks depending on the actual weather. But how do we pull in the weather into this site? So how do we pull data about the weather into our website? Well, we want to use some kind of API. And what an API will do is give us a data feed that we can use in our website. Now we need to use a little bit of JavaScript for this, but we're going to be using the Open Meteo API to do this. And what we can see in here is if we scroll down, there's some information about accurate weather forecasts for any location. But we want to find it for our location, for our business's website's location. But if we go to the API docs, we can find out what this looks like. We can find a location. So I'm just going to find where it is. I'm going to find Brooklyn. And what we get is a latitude and longitude where we are in the world. What we can do is fill in some of this info. Now, I don't want to do the hourly weather. I just want the current weather right now and the temperature mainly. So I'm going to uncheck this. And what I want to do is down here in settings, I want to get the current weather with temperature, wind speed, and weather code. So I'm going to turn this on. I also want this in Fahrenheit, and the rest looks pretty good. And what we'll get at the end down here is an API URL. And what I can do is copy and paste this into my browser. And what I'll see is something that looks like this. Now, yours might look a little bit different because I'm using a plugin called JSON Viewer. JSON Viewer just formats a JSON file to make it look a little bit nicer, but we have something that looks like this. We have a JavaScript object that gives us some information about the weather right now. And we can see if we look in here, we have the latitude and longitude, we have a time zone in here, and further in here, we also have the current weather. And we have the temperature, which is 71.1 Fahrenheit right now. And that's what we want to use in our website. We also have the weather code as well, which gives us some information about what the weather is actually doing. Is it clear skies, which it currently is right now, or is it raining really hard? So we'll get that a little bit later. Now, what we want to do is use this API here, this URL in our website. We want to pull this information into the website itself. How do we do this? We're going to use a little bit of JavaScript. So let's set up some JavaScript for this project. First thing I'm going to do is right click and add a new file. I'm going to call this weather.js. Now I want to link my weather.js to my index.html. So I'm going to add this at the bottom. So at the bottom here, just before the body, we're going to add this script tag. What script tag? Well, we need to give it a source of weather.js. And this will basically pull all of the JavaScript code into this web page. Now, in this weather.js right now, currently empty, what do we want to do? Well, what we want to do is update in our index.html our div class weather, the h2, and the p tag with the actual content. So first of all, let's get this div class weather. So I'm going to call this something like panel. That's the panel, like weather panel. Panel is equal to document.querySelector. We want to run this and get the div.weather, the div with the class of weather, similar to what we do in CSS. Next, what we want to do is get the temperature bit. Now the temperature is going to be the H2. It's currently in the M dash with the Celsius sign and Fahrenheit in there. So let's get that. We'll do const temp. This is going to be equal to in the panel. We want to do a dot query selector. What do we want to get? The H2. Now, what we want to do is update this temp and say, let's change this inner HTML to basically update. So just to see if this works, I'm going to do temp.inner HTML, all capitals HTML. And what we're going to do is put this in a backtick. We're going to say backtick, and then this is currently going to be what temperature? Let's say it's 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's not outside, it's 71 right now, but let's just see if this works. If I save this now and we go back to our website, what we'll see is this says 32 Fahrenheit. So what we want to do is fill this in with the right information. Now, there's one thing that we need to do before we actually start to pull our information in, and that's basically make our current site run on HTTP or HTTPS. Now, if you're running this in something like VS Code, you might want to use a kind of like live server on here. There's a few plugins you can do, but basically what we want to do is run some kind of like server. Now, I'm using this one down here, right in the corner, and it's currently called live server. And if I run it again, what this will do is pop up in the URL. So we need to make sure this is HTTP or HTTPS because the security settings won't let it pull it in, basically. So what we want to do in here is not say temp.innerHTML. What we want to do is basically grab that information from the internet instead. So we're going to make a new function. We're going to do a constant called grab because we're grabbing that information. And this is going to be equal to a function. So function is round brackets, arrow, curly brackets. Now there's a quick problem here. The problem that we've got is basically when we grab that information, it might take a few seconds to get that information. It might take half a second or it might take 5 seconds. So what we want to do on our function is say, well, we need to wait for that information to come back from the other place on the internet. So we're going to make this function here an asynchronous function, which means we want to wait for stuff to happen. So I'm going to add the word async at the start. We want to wait for that data to come back. And when that data's come back, do some extra stuff. So this is a function. It's an async function. We haven't run this function so far. We've set it up, but we need to run it. When do we want to run this? Well, we want to run this when we load the page. So underneath, I'm going to run grab as soon as we run the page. So we've got this set up, but what is the code that we want to do here? Well, what I want to do is fetch that information from that URL into the page itself. What is the URL? Well, I need to go and find that URL up here, and I'm going to get this URL from the address bar. So how do we do this next? Well, what I want to do is do a request, get that information, turn it into something I can use, and then use it. So the first thing we're going to do is make a request. We're going to make a constant called request in our function in the curly brackets. What we're going to do is make this equal to, and await, because we want to wait for it to do its stuff, fetch, and run fetch. We want to basically say to the browser, go and get this from somewhere else. What do we want to get from somewhere else? Well, this URL. So in here, I'm going to put in a string, this URL. Now, this is going to be quite long. It's going to be HTTPS and then api.openmeteo.com, and then this big long string in here. But this is basically going to go to the internet and grab it. Now, what we want to do is get that request and turn it into something we can use. In this format, it's a JSON field. So we're going to say underneath constant response. And what we want to do is take that request and turn it into something we can use. We'll make this equal to await the request dot JSON. We want to take the request and turn it into a JSON object that we can actually work with. Now, what do we want to get from this JSON object? Well, what I wanted to do, if we remember from before, we did temp.inner HTML, and this was equal to, in the backtick string, 32 degrees Fahrenheit. But what I want to do is replace 32 with the actual information. So what is the information in here? Well, it's in this object. What we want to do is get, this is the whole response, but I don't want to use the whole response. I want to get the whole response and I want to get the current weather and then the temperature from that current weather. So that's what we're going to do next. So instead of this saying 32, we're going to get rid of the number 32. We're going to say $sign and then curly brackets, which means just insert a variable in here. We want to get the response. We want to get from the response from our object the current underscore weather, dot, because we want to get something else inside of this, temperature. And then we can save. And what we should see if we go back to our site now, let's have a look. We refresh, we should see 71, and that should match what we have here. Now mine says 71.1. Now this can change obviously as we kind of change the variables. So currently it's dead on 71, but it could be 71.1. Now I might want to round this up just in case the weather is going to change. So just to round this up, what we can do is math.round and then put some round brackets around this temperature thing. There we go. So what I've done here is just round it to the nearest degree. In this case, it's 71.4, for instance. So what we'll see on our site is always 71 or a round number here. So back on the Open Meteo side, what we can see here is we turned on the settings with current weather, with temperature, wind speed, and weather code. But what is a weather code? Now, luckily, there's some more information further down on the site. If we scroll right to the bottom, we can see that there is these weather codes. They have a code of 0 if it's a clear sky, which it currently is right outside. But if it's something like mainly clear or overcast, it will give us a different code. So we can use these codes to basically fill in the gaps to say what is going on outside right now. Now, I can see just outside of the window that this is clear sky, and this actually will give us the right indication. The weather code for 0 is clear sky for right now. It will be different for you if you're in a place with different weather that isn't a clear sky. But weather code is a thing that we can actually pull out next, and we can use to basically update that next bit of text. So how do we update this next bit of text, this under this kind of M dash right now? So back in our code, what we want to do is fill in this p tag in our weather. So we're going to follow the same kind of thing here. Underneath with our temp, we're going to make another constant called weather. And this is going to be equal to panel.query selector and then brackets p. So we're getting the h2 and the p tag separately. So what we want to do next is update the weathers in a HTML. So underneath, back in my code here, in my function, I'm going to do weather.inner HTML. And this is going to be equal to, well, let's put for now some backticks, clear skies. And let's see if this actually updates. So here what we have is 71 and clear skies. But what happens if we're in a different location that isn't clear skies right now? Something like overcast, then this isn't correct. It's currently clear skies, this says overcast because we're literally writing it into the code. What we need to do is get that code, which is in our function here, in our data, weather code of 0, and then basically turn 0 into something we can use as text. So what we're going to do is convert this. We're going to make a new function. So up here, we're going to make a new function, and I'm going to call this something like code to weather. And this is going to be equal to a function, round brackets, arrow, curly brackets. Now, what we want to put into the code to weather is basically what is the code, and then what comes out at the end of this function is some text about what the weather is. So I'm going to pass in the weather code here. I'm going to pass in the code. And what I want to do in my function is turn this code, which is a number, into something we can use. So let's open up these curly brackets. And what I'm going to use here is a JavaScript switch statement. So switch, round brackets, curly brackets. I'm going to pass in the code. And what we can do here is say, what is the code based on this? And it's almost like an if statement in a way, and then turn it into something we can use. So what we need to do is almost like replicate what is in the documents here. So if the code is 0, we should return back something like clear sky. So in this statement, we're going to say case 0 and then a colon. If it's 0, we want to return clear skies. Now, if it isn't this, we want to say something else. If this is case 1, this is going to be mainly clear. If this is case 2, it's going to be partly cloudy. If it's 3, it's going to be overcast. And we need to kind of do this for all of them, basically. Now, I'm not going to do them for all of them. You're very welcome to. I'm just going to keep them as this kind of main view at the top. So case 1 is going to be, let's return back. Well, it says mainly clear, so I'm going to say mainly clear as well. If it's case 2, we're going to say return the next one, which is partly cloudy. I could just write cloudy instead. It doesn't need to match as long as it makes sense. Case 3 is going to be return overcast. Now, what happens if it's not 0, 1, 2, and 3? We can actually return a default in here. So default, we're going to return unknown. Now, what we've done is set up a function that we're not using right now. We've set up code to weather, but basically we're never using this. So what we want to do next is basically say, well, let's use this. So instead of this saying always overcast down here, what we're going to do instead is use this function. So we're going to get rid of overcast. And instead we're going to say code to weather. Now, what we need to do is pass in the number from our JSON. So how do we do this? We're going to get a response, the current weather, and then what we want from our list is the weather code. Weather code's all one word. So in here, we're going to say the response dot current weather dot weather code. And what we can do is then see if this works. So we're going to go back to our site, and this now says mainly clear, because this has actually changed from 0 to 1 in the time that I've been doing this. So if I refresh, this has gone from 0 to 1. The weather has got mainly clear if I look out the window. So the weather is changing as we go, and we're updating the site as we go as well. So we've updated the content of the page, but what about the style itself? Well, it's actually fairly easy to do once we've set this up. So what we kind of want to do, if we look at some of our CSS, what I've got in here is a body, but then a body.clear, and that will give me a different background than body.cloud, which will give me a cloudy background. I've actually got the up here, a blue background if it's clear skies, and a cloudy background if it's not. So what do we want to do here? Well, I want to attach a class to my body depending on this weather code. So I've got clear and cloud. So let's make another function called something like code to class maybe, or code to body style. Let's add this in. So I'm going to make a new constant called code to class. And this is going to be equal to a function. So round brackets, arrow, curly brackets. Now, what do we want to pass into the function? Again, the code, so we know what we're talking about. So code is going to go in here. And we're also going to do the same thing as before. We're going to do a switch statement. So we're going to do a switch and round brackets and curly brackets. We want to pass the code into the switch. And then what we can do in here is say, well, what is the class that we want to do? Well, where do I want this to be clear skies and where do I want it to be cloudy? Well, if I want to do it for 0 and 1 as kind of like clear, then I'm going to do case 0. Now, what I could do here is just say return straight away. But what I can also do is say case 1. So we've got case and then case. They're both going to work together. What we want to do is return clear. This is the class that we're going to add based on our star sheet body class clear. Next, what we want to do is say case 2 and case 3. We're going to return cloud. And of course, what we can do is fill this out for every single one. But if there's ones that we don't have, we're going to say return the default. It's going to return nothing at all. So this is setting up a class that we want to add to our body. So we need to get the body next and add this class to it. So to do this, I'm going to go up here and say constant body. This is going to be equal to the document query selector for the body tag. And what we want to do after we've got our JSON feed, we want to pull it in. So further down here, we're going to go back into grab. We've got the weather and the temp update in, but what we want to do is say the body is going to have a class list.add. What do we want to add in here? Well, it kind of depends on this information from the response. So we're going to say code to class, and we're going to pass in this weather code. So this response dot current weather dot weather code. So if we save now and we go back to our site, because this is mainly clear, we will get a blue site. Now, of course, what I can do is change this to see if this works in different locations. And what I can do is go back to the docs. I can go back up here and say, well, I want to change the location to be somewhere else, somewhere where it's likely to be cloudy, somewhere like Manchester in England, where I'm from, usually very, very cloudy. So I get a different URL here. I've got different things in here. I'm going to copy and paste into my request. So I'm going to comment this out and put in a different string. And let's see if this looks different on our site. So now we're different temperature. It is now overcast in Manchester as expected. If we wanted to change that text, we would just go in and add it manually. So we'd go in our index.html and add in Manchester instead automatically. And then we update to a different location very quickly. So what we've done is we've updated not only the text of our HTML, we've also updated the style of our CSS using this JSON feed. So that's it. Hopefully it's very easy to add your very own weather in your wherever you are right now to your very own website on the internet. Now, I'm in the middle of actually moving location myself. There's actually lots of boxes out of shot right now. So you'll actually be seeing me in a different location very soon as well. But if you enjoyed this video, as always, please give it a like. If there's anything you'd like me to cover, as always, please put it in the comments below. And there should be 2 more videos for you to watch right here. And I kind of stumble over my words, but I'm going to keep this in because why not? You know, it's a nice day, and I'll see you in another video very soon.